Okay, then I'm going to get back to share screen. Which one? Okay, how do I get this big? This is the first slide. All right, we'll just make do with this, I suppose. Everybody can see the screen? Nampak screen tak?
Can, Doctor.
Okay,
Nampak, Doctor.
very good. Today we are going to talk about workplace learning. This is a very important topic in the learning organization because we all learn at the workplace, right? In fact, workplace learning takes up about 80% of what we know about our own work. Of course, when we go in, probably there'll be some orientation training, some induction, and also probably we have some other things helping us out with our learning. Okay? You can never beat learning by doing the work itself. I think most of you have found that out also when you want to learn, for example, some programs, for example, learning Word. You actually learn how to do it.
Kat depan kau botol susu. Botol susu.
Yeah, botol susu.
Mainan.
Okay, if you have botol susu with you, please put on for a while. Okay, if you have to, you just put on mute. Now, what is so unique about workplace learning? There is something that we need to discuss later on that puts workplace learning as being in itself an important way most people learn with it,
Mainan.
right?
Botol
And then,
susu rendah.
hey, botol
Mana
susu
semua orang
mute kan,
ni?
tolong mute kan botol susu.
Kenapa adik Umar ni? Kenapa adik Umar ni?
Okay. All right. Now, let's talk about learning. We have in the past discussed what is learning, and we have established that learning is indeed change. We have discussed that learning is change in knowledge, learning in effective knowledge, skills, attitude, and also aspirations. And one other way to look at learning is that we change in terms of the cognitive changes in ourselves, affective changes, and psychomotor changes. Now, cognitive changes deals with the brain, how you think. For example, how you know something, how you make decisions, how you organize your thoughts, right? How you articulate your speech. That would probably be what is considered to be cognitive side of learning, right? There'll be the cognitive domain. And then that will be, the other one will be affective, right? Mind you, right? It is not effective, where you start with an E, but it is affective, where you start with an A. Now, what is affective change? Right? An effective change would be much more dealing with change in sentiments, for example, change in feelings, change in emotions, right? So this deals with how you feel rather than cognitive, where you talk about change in mental in your mind, mental models, and affective changes is how your attitude changes. Right? And then in the other one would be psychomotor changes. Now, Bloom started off with just cognitive and affective changes, and later on, psychomotor changes is added on to the taxonomy of learning, right? And psychomotor learning, in the beginning, it just deals with skills. And word itself, psychomotor, deals with motor skills, how we use our muscles, and then how we put it into muscle memory. For example, kicking a ball, right? We learn how to kick a ball. And then, for example, we also learn to ride a bicycle. We learn how to balance the bicycle. We learn how to pedal the bicycle. We learn how to move forward the bicycle. We learn how to steer the bicycle, right? And as we improve our psychomotor skills, we are able to do many more things with the bicycle. For example, we can do wheelies, or maybe you can take your hands off the handlebar. Now that would be an increase in the psychomotor abilities. So we can also look at learning apart from knowledge change, attitude change, skill changes, and also aspiration changes, to be much more looking into the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor type of changes, right? Now, oops. Let's move on to the next slide, right? At the moment, if you have any questions while I'm talking about the slides, please feel free to intervene. Right? I'm just getting used to talking to the screen. I don't see anyone, so it's just like talking to myself. But I'll get used to this. Okay, the ways of learning. Number one, there's formal learning. Now, formal learning is what, for example, we are involved in, right? Learning in classes, learning at the university, learning in school, where there is a set curriculum, where there is an appointed teacher, where there are, for example, prescribed contents of what you need to master. And in the end, there you will be certified to be able to be competent in something, right? So if you are doing your bachelor's in human resource development, then in the end, the university will certify that you have completed all the courses within a certain level of competency. And as such, you are granted a certificate, in this case, your diploma, your degree, which states that you have been certified to be competent within a certain field or specialization, right? So formal learning, there is usually an institution, it is offered by an institution, either schools or universities, and there are certifications, there is a curriculum, there is a set time for learning, right? If you look at our program itself, the time that is set for the program is, for example, 4 years, or you complete a certain amount of credits to be able to be certified as being the holder of a bachelor's degree in human resource development. So all you need to think about when you talk about formal learning are usually offered by institutions of learning, such as schools or universities, college and universities. Now that would be formal learning. We move on to the next way of learning, which is the non-formal type of learning. Now, where does non-formal learning happens, right? So if you have formal learning to be certified, to have the certification, curriculum, and time, and appointed people to teach you, then non-formal is probably one level below the formal education. And this would be, for example,
Sorry,
learning.
doktor.
Yes, go
Ada
ahead.
yang tak masuk lagi.
Ada yang tak masuk lagi? Okay. How do I get there? Okay. All right, let's just wait for them. Okay, because I don't have I got too many things on my screen. I just don't want. If you see any of your friends not in yet, just let me know. Okay. All right. We were talking about non-formal learning as being one level below formal type of education. And one good example of non-formal learning would be training programs that are offered by organizations. Now, those would be considered as non-formal. They may certify you, but that certification is usually within the organization. There is a certain curriculum and there is a trainer that probably teaches you. But compared to formal education, these are not institutions, formal institutions that are able to grant you certification. They don't offer bachelor's program, master's program, or doctoral programs within their teaching and learning programs. So these would be non-formal. And organizations conduct a lot of non-formal learning in their training programs for their employees, for example. Right? And other types of non-formal, for example, Microsoft may offer their own certification, right? People will be certified as being Word competent, or they may be certified as being PowerPoint competent, right? So those certifications, although it is a certificate, it is not a certificate that is granted by a formal institution of learning. And as such, we consider that to be much more non-formal in nature. Now, the third type of learning, the third ways of learning would be an informal learning. Right? And informal learning happens all the time. For example, when you ask your friend a question about, hey, how do I cook biryani? Right? Now that would be an informal way of seeking knowledge. And when your friend teaches you how to cook biryani, then that would be an informal way of learning. If you all remember how you learned to ride a bicycle, for example, that wasn't conducted in any classes, or maybe there would be a non-formal class, but most likely your parent or your dad or your mom or your sister or your siblings, right? Either a sister or brother would teach you how to ride a bicycle. Now that would be an informal type of learning where there is no curriculum and you learn at your own pace, and there's no content for you to master and no certification regarding whatever you learn. It's just that you learn from someone else in any surrounding. Even at the workplace, probably there's a lot of informal type of learning that happens, right? So informal learning compared to formal and non-formal, usually they are much more free in nature, where people would seek by themselves knowledge that they would need to use in their everyday life, right? For someone who wants to, for example, learn how to fish, how to catch a fish, he would just ask a friend. Anyone know how to use a net, a fishing net? Now, how do you use a fishing net? There might be classes offered by non-formal education, non-formal institutions on how to use a net, but most likely your learning will be informal, where you would ask a friend to teach you how to do it, right? My daughter, for example, learned how to bake a cake. What cake was it? It was a marble cake. And how did she do it? How did you do it? Yeah, she asked a friend who was actually in Germany, right? She used her iPad and they interacted on the iPad, showing each other. They were baking the cake together. And in the end, that's how my daughter learned how to bake a cake, by asking a friend. And in this case, it was through the iPad. What application they use? Okay, they use FaceTime. And in FaceTime, the friend showed her what to do in order to bake a cake. Now, this would be a good example of informal learning. There are lots of informal learning activities that go on. And in fact, most times we learn through informal learning. Now, we get to the next type of learning, which is incidental learning. How would one person learn incidentally? Now, the word itself, incidental, means that it is not designed. It is by chance. It is probably by accident that you learn something, right? While walking, you notice a beautiful flower and someone says, hey, that's a very nice hibiscus, right? So it probably doesn't look like any hibiscus that you've seen before, but it happens that you come across the hibiscus and you learn what the hibiscus is all about, right? And incidental learning, for example, if you see a snake, what do? Right? Now, most people would run away from a snake. But if you are trapped, for example, the snake is also trapped, then both of you might not be able to know what to do. The snake cannot run away, and you cannot run away, right? So in the end, you froze, right? You did not do anything, you stood still. And after a while, standing still, the snake moved away. Now, this would be an example of incidental learning, where you learn what to do in an event when you encounter face-to-face with a snake. So the next time that you see a snake, you will be able to know what to do. Don't move, just stay still and let the snake move on. Because generally, snakes also do not want to come into contact with a human being, right? And incidental learning, for example, for people who have ridden a bicycle, right? When you ride a bicycle, probably the first time that I rode a bicycle, I learned not to brake when I took a corner. What happens when you brake when you take a corner? Right? The wheels would stop moving and you would slide, and as a result of that slide, you would fall down. And as such, it is not designed. You did not set out deliberately to learn not to brake at corners, but it happened by chance. In fact, it happened by accident, right? So in the future, you learn not to brake while taking a corner. And this is actually applied to motorcycles. And this would also be applied to driving a car. You know that you should not brake when you are taking a corner, because when you take a corner, the wheels will lock and the tires will slide, and you will not have any control of your vehicle. So that is an example of incidental learning, right? And there is also one other way of learning, which you would call, or which is called intuitive. The word intuitive itself indicates that it is natural. It is something that is instinctive, right? Now, what is an example of an intuitive learning? If you look at babies, for example, right, newborn babies, how do they learn how to drink milk, right? Where did you get the milk? When the mother, for example, offers her breast to the baby knows what to do, right? So taking in the nipple, the baby will know what to suck. The baby won't blow. Now, this would be something that is natural. It is intuitive nature, right? So intuitive people who propagate or who believe in intuitive learning, believe that the learning is natural. So these are the 5 ways of learning: formal, non-formal, informal, incidental, and intuitive. So you should be able to differentiate between each of these ways of learning and be able to provide some examples, right? So continue to think about it and think about examples for each of this type of learning. Any questions now?
Doktor, sorry to
Yes, please.
interrupt. Tapi ada yang terkeluar, dia nak masuk balik.
Nak masuk balik, lepas keluar. Okay.
Disconnected tadi.
Ya, kadang-kadang dia line poor, dia putus. Tak apa, bagi tahu terus. Okay, so that would be the ways of learning. Now, what are forms of learning? We have looked at this, for example, we have discussed this, and looking at, for example, the Masick and Watkins 7 imperative for learning, we know there are 3 levels of learning. Learning happens at the individual level, learning happens at the group level or team level, and learning happens at the organization level. And in fact, if you look at Masick and Watkins model, they added another level of learning, which is the global level of learning, right? Which is a much more extensive form of learning. So individual learning happens within individuals. When one person learns about something, right? He or she would read a book, for example, and learn, right? You would involve, for example, you go to the library and study by yourself alone. That would be individual type of learning. Now, there would also be study groups, for example, that you would form, where you learn together as a group, where you exchange information, where you ask each other questions for clarification, when you ask your friend when you don't know about something within a group. Now, group learning are also a type of learning. So apart from individual learning, group learning is also a form of learning. And the third level is organization learning. And organization learning happens within the organization. And remember, we talk about learning in the organization and we talk about the learning organization. So both these types of learning will be an organization level of learning, where one individuals within the organization learn, and then they would embed or they would store whatever knowledge that they have to the organization, for example, by documenting their knowledge on what they know or techniques or procedures or technology, right, within the organization. So that is actually a way of storing their knowledge into the organization, where in other times we use the word embed. So you embed knowledge within the organization so that other members within your organization can access that knowledge and use it for themselves. Right? For example, you may have found a technique of improving purchasing, right? Or you may have found a way of getting or checking the quality of the inputs that are being bought by your organization, right? Suppose you're a restaurant, right? And the first time that you are actually buying shellfish for the restaurant. Now, how do you know that the shellfish is good? How do you know how to determine the quality of the shellfish? Right? So experience will tell you what is good and what kind of shellfish would be used for what kind of dishes, for example. Now, this is knowledge that you would probably accumulate through your experience. And when you write it down as a recipe, so you are in fact documenting that knowledge, right? So what you write down, for example, as a dish, right? You write down the ingredients, and then you talk about how the process of making that dish, right? So you give directions on how you're going to do that dish. So this recipe in itself is actually a way of documenting knowledge within an individual and then passing it on to the organization. Okay. Now, the fourth level, which is not here, is the global level. We will deal with that later on. Also, when we talk about Massix and Watkins, 7 imperative of learning, because at the highest level, this is where the organization provides that leadership, right? By being, for example, the best. We know, for example, Google is good. And as such, Google provides that leadership in search engines, for example, right? We know Microsoft keeps producing innovative applications or innovative softwares. And as such, Microsoft is a leader in software, and they are actually at the global level of learning, where people begin to learn from them. They are the leaders within a certain industry, and that will be a global level of learning, right? So you talk about an organization that is a leader, that is the best at what it does. So that organization can be considered to be a global level learner, where people actually look to them to be able to learn about new things, right? And in this era, for example, when you talk about COVID-19, where do we learn how to manage COVID-19? We look, for example, at China, how they manage the pandemic. And as such, we learn at a global level from China, who has had the experience and the technology and the processes of learning. Where we learn, for example, we learn about SMS. What is SMS? Self-isolation, masking, and sanitization. So we learn how to control the virus through practicing self-isolation, where, for example, individuals quarantine themselves for 14 days, for example, right? Now that is one process that we learn at the global level, right? We learn that washing our hands with soap or alcohol can actually kill the virus. Now, where do we know that? We learn that from other countries. For example, we learned about that from China, right? We learn about wearing masks to protect ourselves. Yes, those are global levels of learning. So, individual, group, organization, and one form of learning that I did not add here is about global level of learning. Okay, now we move on to types of knowledge. Basically, we may able to categorize knowledge as being tacit or as being explicit, right? Now, tacit knowledge is personal. We have discussed this, haven't we? Tacit and explicit. Anyone remember? Zian, have we discussed this?
I think no. I haven't heard it before.
Or you haven't heard about tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge?
Yeah.
Okay. Then maybe the next class I will talk about it in more detail. But tacit knowledge is personal in nature. Zian, have you had durians before?
Yeah.
What type of durian did you have? You remember the type of durian that you had?
No.
No? Was it Musang King?
Yeah. That one I have it before.
You've tried Musang King before, right?
Yeah.
Now, can you describe the taste of Musang King to your friends? How does Musang King taste like?
Bitter,
Yeah?
creamy.
Bitter like medicine.
A bit. No. Yeah, a bit.
A bit, right?
Yeah.
Sweet?
Yeah.
Is it
And
sweet like sugar or sweet like honey?
sweet like sugar, I think.
Now, you have tasted the durian, right? You have tasted
Yeah.
Musang King.
Yeah.
But you find it very difficult to describe the taste to your friends. Why is that?
Yes.
Now, this is because that knowledge is personal to you. That knowledge is what you'd call to be tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is something that is within you. It's personal to you. You know what it is. But to be able to tell people what it is actually like is very difficult, right? When I ask you how does Musang King taste like, you probably are able to recall the taste, right? You know how the taste of Musang King is like. But for you to be able to describe that taste is a big challenge because only you know, and probably you don't have enough words to be able to describe it specifically how Musang King tastes like, right? And as such, a lot of people have tried to describe, for example, durians, right? There was one writer, I forgot. She said that durian tastes like eating onion ice creams in a public toilet, right? And then there was this chef called Anthony Bourdain, who passed away already. He described when he ate durians, he described durian as being eating custard in a soil napkin, right? Because most of them recall that there is a very strong smell. And that smell is not something that is appealing. But yet, when they taste the durian, they like the taste. So it is something that is confusing to a lot of people, and they find it very difficult to describe. Now, durians would be something difficult. And most people, for example, take this for example, most people would know how to ride a bicycle, right? But if I were to ask you to explain how you would ride a bicycle, you would probably not be able to do it properly. Now, you know how to do it, but you are just not able to explain it. Now, this is because that knowledge is personal to you. It is a tacit type of knowledge. Okay? As compared to explicit knowledge are those that have already been spelled out, that have already been elaborated to others, right? Knowledge that has already been explained. Explicit means to be able to let out, to explain something. Now, what are the types of explicit knowledge? When you read a book, right? The book, for example, explains about how the leaf of a durian tree looks like, right? What the book is able to do is that the book has made explicit the knowledge about the durian leaf, right? And there are many ways that what I am doing now, for example, I am explaining about knowledge, the difference between tacit and explicit knowledge. What I am doing, in fact, is making that explicit. I'm trying to explain the difference between tacit and explicit knowledge. So explicit knowledge can be made public. You can actually make other people understand what it is. That is what explicit knowledge is all about, right? You are making something that you are actually explaining something that can be looked into, right? So if you, for example, learn mathematics, it is written down there as 1 times 7 is equal to 7. So you look at that, and how do I make that explicit, right? For example, 1 times 7, there are 7 apples, right? And there are one, just one pile of apples that are 7. And then I take another pile of 7 apples. So now there are 2 piles containing 7 apples each. And in explaining multiplication, what I'm doing is that when there are 2, you actually add 7 and 7, and that gives you 14, which is equivalent to 2 times 7. So in a way, what I am trying to do is trying to make 7 multiplication explicit, right? So tacit knowledge is very difficult for someone to explain what it is about because it's personal, but explicit knowledge are usually captured in speech. They are captured in writing. So by going through a recipe, that is an attempt of making a dish explicit, right? You want to learn how to cook rice, for example. There are many ways of cooking rice, and someone explains you how to cook rice. They show you how to cook rice. They demonstrate to you how to cook rice. And that is actually a way of making cooking rice explicit. So the knowledge can actually be transferred to you directly by explanation, by demonstration, or by writing it out, right? So that is the difference between tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge. Any questions on that?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. So if you have, you can always WhatsApp me later. Now, having gone through the different types of learning, we now look into the workplace. What is a workplace? The workplace, basically, a place where we do work, right? I do my work in classes, right? So the class is actually my workplace. And right now, I am teaching through Zoom to you. And why is the workplace? My workplace is actually in Zoom, which is the medium I am using to teach, right? And people who work in factories, that is their workplace. People who work at the market, that is their workplace. Basically, the workplace is a place where individuals complete tasks and activities collectively in order to achieve specified goals. So you are within an organization where you collaborate, where you work with other people to complete a task and as such achieve the goals that have been set out, right? For example, in a television manufacturing company, That is the workplace where people actually assemble the television so that in the end it becomes a television. In a restaurant in itself is a workplace where people do different types of work so that together when all that work is coordinated, it turns out into something that is specific, basically food that is to be served to the customers, drinks that is to be served to the customers. So the workplace is where people do things together to produce an outcome. Okay, so the workplace is socially constructed. Why is it socially constructed? Because you have different people interacting with each other, working together collaboratively, coordinatedly, so that they are able to organize their work to come up with a product, right? So as such, it is a socially constructed situation where people are expected to achieve certain goals through interdependent activities, where they rely on each other, where they work with each other, right? So that is what is unique about the workplace, since different workplace will have a different social system. Why is it a different social system? Because people before are different. Different people, although it may be the same restaurant, it may be the same McDonald's, right? And as you very well know, McDonald's have standard operating procedures where work is actually designed in processes that are followed, they are adhered strictly, right? But the difference between one McDonald's outlet and another McDonald's outlet are the people within it. And as you know, each individual is different. You may have a very calm and patient person as the manager in one outlet, and you may have a temperamental manager at another place. And each of these manager would have an effect on the people, on the employees that are under him. And as such, they would provide a different workplace just simply because the manager behaves differently, right? So as such, each organization, no matter how similar the work is, right, the task is, no matter how similar the product is, they are all unique in the sense that they are socially constructed. And they comprise, they are made up of individuals that are different. And when they interact with each other, the interaction is always different, right? So that is the first thing about the workplace, in the sense that each workplace is unique in itself, okay? Now, taking that into account, learning at work would involve things such as the technical aspects of it. And this would be the industry-specific knowledge. You may have different oil companies. You may have Petronas, you may have Shell, you may have ExxonMobil, and so on, right? But each of them would have its own technology, its own technical expertise, its own people who are experts at doing certain things, right? So this would be technical and industry-specific knowledge. A much more simple example would, for example, be McDonald's, right? We have discussed that each McDonald's outlet is different in a sense because the people working in it are different, right? But when we talk about industry-specific knowledge, McDonald's has its own industry-specific knowledge. It has its own menu. It has its own way of preparing burgers, right? Now that would be the industry-specific knowledge that has a certain technical element to it. Compare that, for example, to Burger King. Now, Burger King would have its own way of preparing its burgers. While McDonald's fries the burgers in a pan, you may have Burger King grilling their burgers, right? So that in itself is a difference in the technology. It is a technical difference between the two organizations where each of them would have their own industry-specific knowledge, right? And then there may also be international business management knowledge, where you need to be able to learn to do business differently in each country, because each country would have its own laws, regulations, and requirements for business to practice within the country. Now, if you were to do business in China, as opposed to doing business in Malaysia, you would probably have two different sets of regulations that you have to adhere, that you have to observe. And as such, these would provide different business management and practices between countries, right? Even if you look at Malaysia, it's probably within states, right? There are different regulations that businesses have to observe in order for them to practice or operate within a certain state, right? And then there would also be foreign culture if you were to work globally, right? They are different in languages, right? Although people in Malaysia may speak Mandarin, but if you go to China, you may not be able to understand the Mandarin that is being used in China. You may be able to catch certain words, but overall, you may find it difficult to actually understand the Mandarin that is being spoken in China, right? Local customs, right? What people do, for example, when they meet with each other, or when you set appointments with each other, right? If you go to Denmark, you say you have a meeting at 8 o'clock, you must be there before 8, because at 8 o'clock, the meeting will start, regardless whether you are around or not, right? If it is just between you and another person, if you're not there at 8, then they would consider the meeting to be canceled, and they would just move on. Now, this would be a difference in customs, in the local customs, right? Compared to that in Malaysia, right? We say our meeting starts at 8. We probably begin at 8:30, and people are not too worried, right? They don't care much that a 8 o'clock meeting begins at 8:30. Okay, work practices at foreign sites, right? We've talked about regulations and requirements, and as such, the work practices may be different. And then there are also how people will interact with each other, right? There are places, for example, when the boss says something, people will follow immediately. In Malaysia, for example, when the boss says something, people will not do immediately, for example. So these are work practices, right? If you go to certain countries, for example, they don't practice safety measures very well, right? You go to construction sites, in most developed countries, they adhere strictly to safety because the possibility of being sued by someone who is injured at work is very high, right? In Malaysia, probably it's in between. It's not very high, but probably in some other countries, they don't even observe safety practices, right? And another thing about learning at work is partner relations, right? This is how you interact, your expectations about your partners, right? The integrity level of different partners, right? So when you work with someone else, there are always these elements to take into account, right? And finally, that's what you call the global mindset. To be able to learn at a global level. Most people are still thinking at the local level. If you look for at HSBC, for example, they even have a slogan that says, think locally and act globally, or something like that, right? So different places, if you go to India, in McDonald's, they don't serve beef. Why? Because the cow is considered to be sacred. So instead of beef burgers, you may have mutton burgers. Or in some places where they don't take meat at all, you may have vegetarian type of burgers, right? In Malaysia, we promote, although it is McDonald's, but the McDonald's here promote their products differently, right? And suddenly, when it's time for Chinese New Year, you may find prosperity burgers, which is not so anywhere else in the world, but probably just in Malaysia, right? So this is a global mindset where they try to suit their product to the local taste, simply because they have a better understanding of how local people work. Although you are a global company, you are an international company, but when you go to a certain country, you take into account the local customs and you begin to offer local products. So this is about learning at work in terms of the subject matter or in terms of the contents of learning, right? Now, how do we learn? So these are the methods of learning, right? At the workplace, most people learn through experience by actually doing the work, right? This is a hands-on approach to learning, right? How do you learn, for example, to fix the car for most people at the workshops, right? You actually learn how to open the screw, right? Which way you twist, and then soon you learn how to be able to do something better, right? At the restaurant, for example, people learn what is the correct heat for cooking, right? And actually this happens by learning to do the work hands-on, right? If you observe how people learn how to work at a restaurant, it's very interesting, because even the temperature of the fire will determine how successful that dish will become. Because if it is too hot, then probably it will get burnt. If it is the fire is too low, then probably it will become too dry. So these are the things that people learn how to do certain type of works. And if we look at McDonald's, McDonald's have standard operating procedures for all their food. We've discussed, for example, McDonald's fries. They are nice. Why? Because McDonald's has developed a specific procedure for frying their fries. They fry their fries at a certain temperature, if I'm not mistaken, 230 degrees Fahrenheit, 230 degrees centigrade. Oh, no, the oil is at a certain, I forgot, but it was something like 230 degrees, well, centigrade for now, Celsius. And then they fry it within 1 minute and 30 seconds, right? So 1 minute and 30 seconds, the alarm will sound, and as a result, they will take it out of the oil, and then they will shake it 2 times. In fact, that is also the procedure. Let me see the phone for a while. Hello. Salam ya. Yeah? Hello? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay, kejap ya. Ada, dah sampai dah ya. Dia orang nombor 10. Ya, kejap. Just give me a moment, I have something to attend to. Okay, sorry for the interruption. As we were talking just now, doing hands-on work, for some people actually learn to do work by actually doing it. And of course, the other way is learning through mistakes. When you make a mistake, then people learn to make that, not to make the same mistake twice. Have you all heard about the story of Mizuho Securities? Mizuho, right? I actually forgot. They were selling shares, right? I think they wanted to sell something like 6,000 shares at 10,000. I don't know. There was one share they needed to sell. I forgot the number, but they needed to sell a certain amount of shares at a certain price, where the price, for example, is like 600, for example, 600 ringgit, right? And they wanted to sell 5 lots of shares at 600 ringgit each. But instead of selling 5 shares at 600 ringgit each, they put it on computer as selling 600 shares at 5 ringgit each. Okay. Now, there's a big difference in that, because 5 shares at 600 ringgit each will bring you 30,000 ringgit. But if you were to sell 600 shares at 5 ringgit, then you would make a big loss. I'll give you the story later on. But in the end, when Mizuho Securities made that mistake, they learned from it by adopting new checking procedures later on, so that they won't be making the same mistakes, right? So this would be an example of how people learn from mistakes. Okay, so these are learning through experience. And then the other way of learning is through scanning. Scanning is an example of looking out. What is out there, so that you are better able to think about what you need to do. Example of scanning would be, for example, reading. A lot of executives, when they want to go or when they want to open a business elsewhere, they would read about the different types of products within the country. They would learn about their competitors. They would learn about the regulations. And these are all probably published in documents. And just so they are able to read to find out more information about certain things, right? Benchmarking performance against other companies. So this would be a good way of placing how you are actually performing within your own industry, right? So Proton would benchmark their production against similar products, right? For example, cars about the same sizes so that they know what extent they are performing, right? Most companies would benchmark so that they are able to get an idea of what they need to do in order to perform better in their own industries, right? And finally, we are walking the streets basically to be, this is where someone learns informally, right? So they would just go outside and watch and observe people. What people do out there? What do they like? What don't they like? How they think about certain products. When they want to buy certain things, what do they do? Right? So you want to buy, I don't know now in China, but last time when I went to China, even going to the departmental store, they would simply quote you a price. For example, I know my friend wanted to buy underwear. So he went to this departmental store and he asked for the underwear, and they said it was 60 renminbis, right? For one underwear, which is outrageous in Malaysia. But for us Malaysians, we are so used that at department stores, prices are fixed. You cannot actually bargain for prices. But in China at that time, this was somewhere in 2004. At that time, you can actually bargain. If they quote you 60 renminbi, you can actually ask for less. And then that would be the price that they would come to. That would be an agreed price that you would buy certain products. But I think things may have changed now. Way back then, when China just came out as a capital started practicing capitalism, these things did happen. I don't know, maybe our friends in China can later share with us whether this is still true in China. Okay. And finally, learning at work is through networking with counterparts, right? This is where you actually have communication and learn from your partners or people who work together with you. So forming networks would be another method for learning at work. Okay, we are going to move on talking about embedding knowledge, right? Embedding knowledge is simply about storing knowledge, right? How people learn from each other, right? One way of learning from each other, or where you actually store knowledge within an organization, is where you have collegial interaction, where you actually communicate and interact with people of the same level, which are, for example, your work partner or your co-worker, right? So this would be collegial interaction. So there would be much more of an horizontal level of interaction. The other type of interaction would be hierarchical in the sense that either you talk to your superior tells you what you need to do, or you may talk to your subordinates, where you actually tell people below your rank on what needs to be done. Just another moment, I've got phone calls coming in today. Hello? Yeah? Yeah, yeah. Oh, iya ke? Saya back in nanti Kak, saya transfer. Ya, ya, saya selalu transfer aja. Oke, thank you. Alright, sorry. Where you either talk to your superior or you either talk to your subordinates, and this will be hierarchical. So you go either up or down in terms of your interaction, right? Another way of embedding knowledge is formal training and conferences, where you learn from other people who have been appointed to teach or train you. The other way is through conferences, where, for example, if you see doctors, right, and professionals, accountants, and so on, and even academicians and even students, we go to conferences to learn from other people. We learn from papers that are being presented by other people. So formal training and conferences is another way of learning. And the third way is through organization mechanisms, right? So organization mechanisms are those that are systems that are actually within the organization that are designed so that they are able to capture, store, and allow people to access knowledge. And these are usually in the forms of policies and procedures, right? We talk about, for example, McDonald's have standard operating procedures. Now, that is actually a mechanism where knowledge has actually been embedded into the organization system. Electronic communication, right? We are, for example, interacting through Zoom. Now, this is an electronic communication, which is far more advanced than what we had 10 years ago, right? So during COVID-19, we are using Zoom as a medium of teaching and learning. So this is an electronic communication. Last time, for example, we only had the email, right? Where we actually communicated through email. Nowadays, electronic interaction is much more sophisticated and much more advanced. We can even communicate with each other through our smartphone by just using WhatsApp, right? And we can actually learn from each other. I am, for example, going to, for example, post Mizuho Corporation, learning from mistakes, for example. So that would be a way of sharing information through the electronic media. And finally, doing trend analysis, right? And most futurists and most organizations also would conduct trend analysis looking into market analysis, right? In trying to understand their own businesses, right? They would do what they would, for example, be environmental scans, looking at what is happening within the community, looking at what is happening within the country they are operating, so that they are better able to anticipate and plan programs for the future, right? So these are the different ways of embedding knowledge within organization. And in a way, they are also a way of turning an organization into a learning organization. All right. And finally, I have this assumptions on knowledge and acting and learning. This is from Charles 2005, right? So in conclusion about workplace learning, number one, we can always say that the individual is embedded in a specific or unique social situation simply because they interact with different people in different organizations, right? Knowledge is also experience-based. We talk, for example, about tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge, right? So there exists a difference between theoretical knowledge and also practical knowledge. What we know theory and what we know about what we need to actually practice. Right? Context and situation have high relevance in terms of knowing, acting, and learning because we act according to our environment. We behave in a certain way of how it is relevant to the environment that we are within. Right? Knowing can be made partially explicit, right? Decontextualize historical knowledge through reflection. So most of the things that we learn at the university is actually decontextualized, right? We are not learning within the context of the operations of the organization, but we are learning, for example, human resource development in the university, in the classes, and in such a way, it is not within a certain context. That knowledge has been made decontextualized and explicit. So whatever you may read from books, right, they are actually theoretical knowledge. And they have been decontextualized in the sense that they are not within the workplace in itself. So we must always remember that at the workplace, where people actually do the work, learning is actually contextualized. It is learning within a certain context, right? And then finally, learning processes are situated. Different places have different ways of learning, and people learn different things, different contents, different subject matter, and there is a different method of learning within a specific context. One thing that is very important when you talk about workplace learning is that the workplace operates within its own context. Different workplaces have different contextual learning processes. Okay, so with that, I end the slide presentation, and I would like to open up to questions if anyone has anything to be further clarified. Please. Any questions? Anyone? Everyone still there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right
good.
now, no question.
Okay. Zian, where are you from?
Perak.
Perak.
Yeah.
Which part of Perak?
Bengkalan. Ipoh.
Kalan Ipoh. So Ipoh, right?
Yeah.
Do Ipoh people speak the Perak dialect?
Not really.
Not really.
Yeah.
Ipoh is more cosmopolitan. They don't speak Perak.
Yeah.
Okay. So that in itself is actually context. Now, an Ipoh person who goes to Bota, for example, or who goes to Parit, or goes to Kuala, right? Now, they must be able to learn to understand the dialect, right? Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
To be able to do the work there. Anyone from China today?
No, no one from China.
No one from China. Where are the
Yeah.
Chinese students? They have gone back to China or what?
I think so. There are some of them are still at KL.
They're still in KL. I'm trying to see who's in the class. One, two, three, four, 5, 6, 7, 8. About 48 people. Okay. Any questions, anyone? Is there anything that you need? So from now, next week is a break, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then 1st June, actually, they're going to, well, UPM actually is going to allow some of his staff to come back, but you'll still all be at home. So we will have a class on Tuesday after the break. How long is the break? 2 weeks or 1 week? Anyone knows? 1 week or 2 weeks? But anyway, as soon as we come back, I believe it'll be after June 9. Then we will probably continue to have classes, virtual classes. All right. So in the meantime, I will I will upload slides onto Putra Blast. This slide has already been uploaded, and we'll continue to upload them so that you can have a look at the slides. And then we will conduct classes virtually. And I don't think we will have a chance of having physical classes anymore, at least for this year, right? So we need to learn how to interact much more efficiently. We must learn how to interact much more effectively through electronic medium, all right? So virtual learning is going to be here for the future, right? And we have to get used to it, okay? Any questions? All right. You may also direct your questions on WhatsApp, and I'll answer you then. So if there's anything, if there's nothing else, class is dismissed. And remember, you can always ask questions on our WhatsApp group. And for those people who you know are not yet on WhatsApp, please invite them. Okay? All right then.
Okay, Doktor.
Bye.
Okay.
Selamat
Thank you,
Raya, Doktor.
Thank you.
Bye, Raya. Selamat Raya.
Raya.
Thank you, Doktor. Bye, Doktor.
Thank you. Selamat Raya.
Thank you, Dokter.
Bye.
Thank you, Doktor. Bye. Assalamualaikum.
Bye. Oh, Carol baru masuk. Carol terkeluar tadi. Sorry, tak dapat masuk kan.
Bye-bye, Doktor.
Okay, bye. Carol awak terkeluar tadi ya?
Ya, Doktor.
Yes. Ya, Carol. Tadi kenapa terkeluar?
Ya.
Mula-mula dah nampak dah. Putus.
Sudah masuk
Okey, tak apa. Saya rekod.
internet. Tak
Jadi
stable.
kan saya upload dalam YouTube kan, saya bagi dia
Okey.
punya link.
Okey, Doktor.
Okey, bye. Selamat Raya.
Okey. Okay, thank you, Doktor.
Bye, Dokter.
Bye. Jangan nakal. Okay, I'm going to end the meeting. Bye.